At Christmas dinner, I overheard Dad giving my condo to my sister. I smiled, helped with dishes, sent a thumbs up when she texted photos of her moving boxes. Then I sold it. 39 missed calls. I didn't answer. The locksmith I hired showed up at 9 a.m. on January 4th, and I tipped him $40 because he didn't ask any questions. He changed the locks on a condo that was no longer mine because the new owner, a retired cardiac surgeon named Dr. Philip Arata, who'd wired $362,000 in cash 4 days after Christmas, had asked me to handle it as part of closing. A small courtesy, a clean handoff. I stood in the hallway one last time, waterfront adjacent, 12th floor, the kind of light that hits the Gulf at 10 a.m. and makes you feel like you're living inside something rare. My sister was probably loading boxes into a rented truck at that exact moment, laughing, talking about paint colors, telling her kids about the pool. I handed the locksmith the new key, thanked him, and drove to Charleston. I turned my phone on the next morning. 39 missed calls. I stared at that number for a long time, not because it surprised me, because I'd expected maybe 20. 39. I made coffee, sat by the window of my corporate lease apartment, 2 bedrooms, furnished, 6th floor, $12,100 a month, completely anonymous. Then I poured the coffee out because my hands were shaking too hard to drink it. Not from fear, from something else. Something that lives in the same neighborhood as grief, but isn't grief. The feeling of having burned down something you loved, even when burning it was the only sane choice. This is the story of how I got there. I bought the Sarasota condo in March 2021 with $72,000 down and a 30-year fixed at 3.1%, which I refinanced 18 months later when rates ticked briefly lower. I want to be specific about the numbers because I want you to understand what we're talking about. I didn't inherit money, I didn't have a trust fund, or a wealthy ex, or a windfall I stumbled into. I'm a 34-year-old project manager at a commercial construction firm in Tampa. I drove a 2018 Honda CR-V with 61,000 miles on it. I brought my lunch to work 4 days a week and took exactly 1 vacation a year, always off-season, always somewhere I could drive to. I saved for 6 years to buy that condo, 6 years of watching what I spent and where it went and what it was building toward. The condo was the Toward. 2 bedrooms, 1 through 100 square feet, 12th floor of a building 2 blocks from Sarasota Bay. I bought it as a rental property, kept my apartment in Tampa, rented the Sarasota unit to a rotating series of short-term tenants through a management company. It cash flowed about $800 a month after fees, taxes, and the HOA. Not life-changing money, but it was mine, and I'd built it, and I was proud of it in a way I couldn't fully explain to people who hadn't spent 6 years building towards something. My family knew about it. They'd visited once, briefly, when I first bought it. My mother had said it was nice. My father had looked around and said the HOA fees seemed high. That was the last time they showed much interest. My sister Jenna is 3 years older than me. She married Luke Calloway in 2018, a tall, loud, chronically optimistic man who had, in the 6 years I'd known him, attempted and abandoned a landscaping business, a pressure washing business, a consulting practice that was never clearly defined, and a brief foray into cryptocurrency that I'd watched from a careful distance. They had 2 kids, ages 7 and 4, who were genuinely wonderful and completely innocent of their parents' financial chaos. They'd been renting a 3-bedroom in Bradenton, behind on rent twice that I knew of, probably more that I didn't. My father, Gerald, 66, retired electrician, the particular kind of patriarch who mistakes volume for authority, had been quietly covering their gaps for years. He wouldn't say that. He'd say he was helping, which in his vocabulary meant doing something for someone without their knowledge, and then using it as leverage indefinitely. I knew this pattern. I'd watched it my whole life. I'd simply, carefully made sure I was never financially dependent enough for it to apply to me. That was my mistake. I thought independence was protection. I didn't account for the fact that what my father actually wanted wasn't my dependence. He wanted my compliance. Christmas dinner was at my father's house in Port Charlotte, 4-bedroom ranch, acre of land, the same house he'd lived in for 30 years. My mother had died 4 years earlier, which had, if anything, made my father more certain that his judgments were correct, since there was no longer anyone in the house to push back. I drove down from Tampa on the 24th, brought a good bottle of Cabernet and a pecan pie from a bakery I liked. I was in a decent mood. I just closed out a strong quarter at work. The condo had been fully booked through January, and I'd been approved for a pre-qualification on a second investment property I was eyeing in St. Pete. Things were good. I was careful and I was building and things were good. Dinner was fine. My aunt and uncle were there. Megan, my cousin 28, who processes emotion primarily through gossip and whom I loved despite this, sat next to me and kept me company through the long stretches. My father held court at the head of the table, which was his natural state. Jenna and Luke arrived late with the kids, who immediately improved the atmosphere by being 7 and 4 and excited about everything. After dinner, I slipped out to take a work call. One of my subcontractors was having a scheduling issue on a project that couldn't wait. I stood in the dark hallway near the back of the house talking quietly, and that's when I heard my father's voice from behind the guest room door. Not a fragment, not a murmur. Clearly, specifically, it's settled. Jenna moves into Alyssa's condo after New Year's. No rent. I stopped talking mid-sentence. My subcontractor said, "Hello? Hold on," I said very quietly. My sister's laugh, soft, relieved, like the answer to a problem she'd already stopped worrying about. My father again. She'll complain, then she'll do the right thing. She always does. Then Luke's voice. voice, asking about keys. Keys. I stood in the dark hallway holding my phone with both hands, and I felt something happen to my face that I was glad no one could see. Not anger exactly, not yet. Something that came before anger. The cold, clarifying feeling of a thing you half suspected becoming real. She'll complain, then she'll do the right thing. My entire life, compressed into one sentence. I'd been the responsible one, the quiet one, the one who didn't cause problems and didn't need managing, and could therefore be allocated. I had built, carefully and over years, a life that required nothing from my family, and my father had somehow read that as a resource he was free to deploy. My subcontractor was still on the line. Sorry, I said very calmly. Where were we? I finished the call. I walked back to the dining room. I picked up a plate of pie and I smiled and I sat down. My father watched me come in with that look he had, satisfied, a little smug, the look of a man who has arranged something and is pleased with the arrangement. He had no idea I'd heard a word. I smiled back, helped with dishes, laughed at Luke's story about the pressure washer that had exploded on a client's deck, and while I laughed, I was already deciding. I was back in Sarasota by 8:03 the next morning. I called Denise Okafor, my realtor, licensed 14 years in Sarasota County, the woman who had found me this unit in 2021 and knew its value down to the quarter, from the parking garage of my building. Merry Christmas, she said. Denise, I need it listed. Today. Pause. It's December 26th. I know what day it is. She heard something in my voice and stopped making observations about the calendar. What's your number? I gave her a number that was $8,000 below what I knew the market would bear. Not a giveaway. I wasn't panicking. I was moving. There's a difference. I wanted it gone in days, not weeks. Sarasota inventory in December was tight. Waterfront adjacent on the 12th floor. The right buyer would move fast. How fast do you need this? She asked. Yesterday. By 2 p.m., a photographer named Carlos was moving through my living room with a wide-angle lens, adjusting blinds to catch the light off the bay. By 6 p.m., the listing was live. By 9 p.m., Denise had forwarded me 4 inquiries. My phone buzzed at 9:41 p.m. Jenna, thinking of driving down this weekend to measure the kids' room layouts? Hope that's okay. I stared at that smiley face for a moment, then typed, sure, let me know. 3 words, enough to keep her comfortable, enough to keep her packing. I poured a glass of water, sat on my balcony in the December dark, and watched a boat move slowly across the bay. Megan called me on the 28th. I'd known she would. Megan was my early warning system, not by design. She simply could not contain information. She loved me genuinely, but she loved drama more, and the two impulses were always in competition. Jenna's telling people, she said, breathless with it. Telling people what? About the condo. She's telling people your dad is helping transition it. She told Carol at the salon that you were finally being generous instead of weird about money. Weird about money, which meant had savings, owned property, made decisions my family couldn't veto. And Luke? I said. Megan dropped her voice like she was reporting from behind enemy lines. He told Ryan at the harbor bar that he'd be living near the marina by January. Said he might even flip the place if you signed it over clean. I wrote that phrase down. Signed it over clean. There are people who exist in a reality where the rules that apply to other people simply don't apply to them. Where ownership is a technicality, where other people's property is just property waiting for the right person to claim it. Luke Calloway was one of those people. I'd always known it. This was simply the first time it had pointed directly at me. I thanked Megan, told her nothing, and hung up. Then I called Denise. What's the offer situation? 2 serious inquiries and 1 time waster. The serious ones are both flying in to see it on the 30th. Good. I went to the unit that evening and walked through it one last time. Packed my personal items, a framed print, 2 plants, a kitchen scale I was particular about, into the back of my CRV, left everything else. The furniture had come with the unit and would convey to the buyer. I stood in the living room for a moment, the light off the water at dusk, the particular quiet of a 12th floor. Then I locked up and drove back to Tampa. Dr. Philip Arata made his offer on December 30th at 4:47 p.m. Cash, no contingencies, 7-day close, $362,000. Denise called me 40 minutes later. You weren't kidding. No. You want to counter? Accept it. She paused. Alyssa, accept it, Denise. There was a beat of silence, professional and careful, where I could feel her deciding whether to ask a question she sensed she shouldn't ask. She didn't ask it. Accepted, she said. I'll send you the paperwork tonight. That night, Jenna sent photos, cardboard boxes stacked in her living room, 2 columns floor to ceiling, labeled in Luke's handwriting, kids' room, kitchen, Miss Ski. The kids in the background, excited and oblivious, were almost ready. Kids are so excited. I sent back a thumbs up. That was the cruelest thing I did. I want to be honest about that. I knew what those boxes meant. I knew she believed it, trusted it, had told her children about the pool. And I sent a thumbs up and went to sleep. Some nights I still think about that, whether I could have handled it differently. Whether there was a version of this where I called Jenna privately before it went this far and said, did you ask me? Did anyone ask me? But I'd played that conversation out in my head a dozen times. I knew how it ended. She would cry. My father would call. There would be an onslaught of guilt and pressure, and eventually I would be standing in my own kitchen wondering how I'd let it happen again. Because that was the pattern. That was always the pattern. She'll complain, then she'll do the right thing. She always does. Not this time. January 3rd, I met with my attorney. His name is Robert Fasano, 22 years in real estate and civil litigation, office in downtown Tampa, the kind of lawyer who charges $350 an hour and is worth every dollar, because Because he doesn't waste your time with reassurance. He reviewed the closing documents, confirmed the title was clean, and then looked at me over his reading glasses. Any complications I should know about? My family believes they have a claim to this property. He raised an eyebrow. What kind of claim? The kind that doesn't exist legally but might exist loudly. He nodded slowly. Is there any written agreement, verbal contract, any documentation of a transfer or promise? No. My father decided unilaterally to give my condo to my sister. Without asking me, without telling me. I overheard it at Christmas dinner. Robert Fasano looked at me for a long moment. Then he wrote something in his notepad. Then there's no claim, he said. The property is yours. The sale is clean. You can do with it whatever you choose. That's what I thought. Is there any possibility of them pursuing legal action? I thought of Luke. Legal action, he'd texted. Not yet, but in the future, that was coming fast. One of them might try something. Then document everything. Keep every communication. Don't engage in arguments. Just document. He slid a card across the desk. If anyone contacts you with a legal threat, call me before you respond to anything. I took the card, shook his hand, paid his invoice. January 4th, 10:13 a.m. I signed the closing documents in Denise's office. She slid them across with a pen and didn't ask any questions, which was exactly what I'd needed from her and exactly what she provided. At 11:02 a.m., $362,000 hit my account. At 11:17, I turned off my phone, loaded 3 bags into my CRV, and drove north on I-75 toward Charleston. The corporate lease was through a program my company offered to employees on extended assignments. I'd filed the paperwork 3 days before Christmas. I had a legitimate project in Charleston, which was convenient, and my manager approved it without a second thought. New city, furnished apartment, P.O. box for mail, no social media posts, no location tags, no public updates of any kind. I turned my phone on at 8 a.m. on January 5th. 39 missed calls. I sat on the edge of my new bed in my new apartment, and I looked at that number, and I breathed. Jenna's texts ran from confused to panicked to vicious in the space of about 40 minutes, like watching someone move through stages of grief at time-lapse speed. 7:14 a.m. Who is Denise? Why is there a lockbox on your door? 7:31 a.m. Alyssa, the building manager, says it's sold. Call me right now. 7:52 a.m. Are you serious right now? Are you actually serious? 8:09 a.m. We had an agreement. That one I stared at for a long time. We had an agreement. An agreement I had never been party to. An agreement made in a guest room at Christmas dinner between my father, my sister, and her husband about my property, without my knowledge or consent. We had an agreement. My father's messages had his particular cadence. Short, declarative, expecting compliance. Alyssa, call me now. This is not acceptable. You will fix this. That last one I read 3 times. You will fix this. As though I were the one who had broken something. As though the natural order of things was that my property belonged to whoever my father decided deserved it, and I had disrupted that order through some act of selfishness or spite. Luke went to threats immediately, which surprised no one. This is legally actionable. My lawyer will be in touch. You are a cold, vindictive, selfish person. From a man who had never successfully completed a business venture or paid a bill on time in his life. I called my father back. He answered on the first ring, which told me he'd been holding the phone. What the hell is wrong with you? Good afternoon. You sold it. Yes. Jenna was, we had discussed, you discussed, I said, in a guest room at Christmas, about a property that belongs to me, without asking the person who owns it. Silence. The particular silence of a man who has spent 66 years being the authority in every room and has just encountered a wall. Then Jenna got on the phone. I could hear that she'd been crying. Her voice had that scraped out quality, the rawness of someone who has been at it for hours. How could you do this to me? I noticed the word. Me. Not the kids, not the family, not the situation. Her. Jenna, I said carefully. You packed boxes before asking me. You drove down to measure room layouts before I agreed to anything. You told people about a move that was never confirmed. You assumed I would fold because I've always folded before. You never said no. You never asked. She started crying harder, and I'd heard that sound my entire life. At the end of every conflict, the tears that arrived just in time to reframe her as the victim and me as the aggressor. I had for 31 years recalibrated myself around those tears, softened my position, given ground, done the right thing, as my father had always predicted I would. We have nowhere to go, she whispered. The kids. You have Dad's house, I said. Since he's comfortable giving away other people's property, he can start with his own. I hung up. I sent one email, group, to my father, Jenna, and Luke, which said only, the condo has been sold. There is no legal claim to the property or proceeds. Any further communication of a legal nature should be directed to Robert Fasano, Esquier, 813-550-194. I blocked Luke's number, muted Jenna's, left my father on red. Then I sat by the window of my Charleston apartment and watched the street below and tried to figure out what I was feeling. Not triumph. That came later, briefly, and it was smaller than I expected. Mostly I felt the specific exhaustion of someone who has just done a hard, irreversible thing that was absolutely necessary. I thought about the boxes in Jenna's living room, the kids' handwriting on the labels, probably. The excitement that was genuine. Whatever else was true. I didn't cry, but it was close. 3 weeks later, Megan called from a number I didn't recognize. Her voice was low in a way that meant she wasn't calling to gossip. She was calling to warn me. Alyssa, Luke filed something. I don't know exactly what, but your dad signed it. I felt felt my stomach drop about 2 inches and then level out. What kind of something? Legal. There's a document. I saw it on your dad's kitchen table when I was there for his birthday. I didn't get a close look, but your name was on it and Luke's name was on it, and it said something about fraudulent transfer. I hung up and called Robert Fasano. He answered his direct line on the second ring. They filed, I said, or they're about to. Luke and my father, something about fraudulent transfer. Robert was quiet for 3 seconds in the way that lawyers are quiet when they're thinking, not when they're surprised. Send me everything, he said. Every text, every voicemail, every email, the listing timeline, the offer, the closing documents, all of it. I want to see it tonight. Is this a real claim? Fraudulent transfer requires demonstrating that you sold the property specifically to deprive a creditor of assets, he said. Your sister and brother-in-law were not creditors. Your father was not a party to any agreement regarding your property. There was no contract, no consideration, no legal obligation of any kind. This is not a real claim, but I want to see exactly what they filed before I tell you that, definitively. What would they need to make it real? Evidence of a verbal contract, at minimum. Witnesses, documentation of an agreement. He paused. Do any of those things exist? No. Then what they have is a filing. People file things all the time that go nowhere. It costs $400 and it makes them feel like they're doing something. Another pause. Send me everything tonight. I sent him everything. The next morning, Robert forwarded me the actual filing with a cover note that said, as anticipated, this is a civil complaint alleging unjust enrichment and fraudulent conveyance. It has no legal merit. I'll have a motion to dismiss on the judge's desk within 10 days. He filed the motion on January 29th. The complaint was dismissed on February 11th. The judge's written order was 3 paragraphs. The second paragraph contained the phrase, no evidence of any legally cognizable agreement, and the third paragraph awarded me $2,200 in legal fees from Luke and my father, which Robert collected efficiently and without fanfare 6 weeks later. I framed the check. Not to cash it, I cashed it separately. I framed a photocopy of the check and hung it in my home office, which I understand is perhaps not a healthy impulse, but it gave me genuine satisfaction every morning, and I've decided to be honest about that. In March, Megan called again, this time from her own number. Things are not good, she said. My father had made the mistake of telling people what he'd planned, the condo, the arrangement, all of it, before it had been confirmed. This is the specific kind of confidence that makes everything worse when it collapses. He told his friends at his weekly card game. He told my aunt. He told people at his church. And then it hadn't happened, and he'd filed a lawsuit. And the lawsuit had been dismissed in 3 weeks and cost him money. People had questions, not hostile questions mostly, just the natural curiosity of people who'd been told one story and were now watching a different one unfold. I thought your daughter was giving Jenna the condo. What happened? How's the lawsuit going? My father didn't have good answers, because the true answer, I planned to give away my other daughter's property without asking her, she found out, and sold it, was not an answer that made him look like the authority figure he'd always presented himself as. Jenna and Luke were still in Bradenton, still renting, 2 months behind on rent again, according to Megan, who had this information from a neighbor who knew the landlord. My father was covering it. He'd always been covering it. The difference was that now he was also covering it without the condo as a solution, and the card game friends knew, and the church people knew, and the story he'd been telling about being a man who managed his family's affairs was not holding together the way it once had. I didn't feel sorry for him. I want to be clear about that, because I've had people tell me I should, that he's my father, that he loves me in his way, that he made a mistake. All of those things may be true, but he stood in a guest room at Christmas and described me as a resource to be allocated. She'll complain, then she'll do the right thing. She always does. And he'd been so confident in that assessment that he'd told people, made plans, let his son-in-law ask about keys. He didn't make a mistake. He made a calculation. He just calculated wrong. In April, I got a letter from my father, handwritten, which surprised me. He wasn't a letter-writing man. It was short. Alyssa, I know I handled this wrong. I know you're angry. When you're ready to talk, I'm here. I read it twice. Then I put it in a drawer, not the trash. A drawer, which I think means something, even if I'm not sure what yet. 6 months after Charleston, I moved back to Tampa. I'd found the St. Pete property, a 2-bedroom condo in a building near Tropicana Field, $285,000, a buyer's market in that specific corridor because of stadium redevelopment uncertainty. My pre-qualification was solid. Robert Fasano reviewed the purchase agreement. My financial advisor, a woman named Claire Whitmore who had her CFE certification and the particular gift of making me feel calm about large numbers, walked me through the acquisition. I put 20% down, financed the rest at 8%, which wasn't ideal but was manageable given the rental yield projections. By September, it was cash flowing. Not as much as Sarasota had, but it was mine and I'd built it, and no one had any plans for it that I hadn't made myself. I talked to my therapist about the family situation in October, Dr. Sandra Perales, licensed clinical social worker, 18 years of practice, the kind of person who asks questions that make you realize you already knew the answer. We'd been meeting monthly for about a year, originally about work stress, increasingly about this. Do you want to reconcile with your father? She asked me at our October session. I thought about that for a long time. I want to have a father who sees me as a person instead of a resource, I said. I don't know if that's the father I have. That's a different question than whether you want to reconcile. I know. She was quiet, which was her way of letting me find the rest rest of it. I think I want to find out, I said finally, whether he can be different, whether this changed anything for him, and if it didn't, then I'll know, I said, and knowing is better than not knowing. In November, I called my father. He answered on the second ring. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Then he said, I didn't think you'd call. I almost didn't. Another pause, long enough to feel the weight of everything in it. I was wrong, he said. It came out flat, unadorned, not the easy apology that wants something back, just the things stated plainly. I treated your property like it was mine to give. I shouldn't have done that. No, I said. You shouldn't have. Your mother would have told me that. I didn't have anyone to tell me that. I didn't say anything. I just let that sit there. I'm not asking you to forgive me right now, he said. I'm just saying I know. Okay, I said. I hear you. We talked for 22 minutes. Not about the condo, not about Luke, not about the lawsuit, about his card game, about a project I was managing in St. Pete, about the weather in Charleston, which I described from memory, small things, careful things. When I hung up, I sat in my Tampa apartment for a while, very quiet, looking at nothing in particular. I don't know what my family becomes from here. I don't know if my father changes or just gets better at appearing to. I don't know if Jenna ever gets it, really gets it, or if she just learns to resent me more quietly. What I know is this. I have a condo in St. Pete. I built it myself. No one knows about it except my attorney, my realtor, my financial advisor, and the tenant who mails me a check on the 1st of every month. And this time I'm not telling anyone, not until I'm good and ready.